how did I first get into photography? I'll tell you how I first got into photography, okay? I was probably, let me think, a sophomore, second year in high school. I grew up on Long Island, and some friends of mine said, you know, there's this photography show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. How about we take a look at some guy, his name is Edward Weston. Okay, well, back in like 1957 or 58, I had no idea who Edward Weston was. But I went to the show, and I remember kind of turning a corner in the show, and I saw his famous photograph of a cabbage leaf, and I swear it took a breath like a lung. It spoke to me, and I was totally mesmerized. It planted something inside of me, and I just felt I need to kind of make this experience happen again. And actually, I bought a camera, and the rest is history. It's like I couldn't do anything else. I'm one of those few. It was like a calling, honestly. And I haven't had what you call a real job. Being, a photographer is a real job. I tried commercial work. I was not very good at it. Although I got to do some architectural work for Walter Gropius when he was at the Architects Collaborative in Cambridge in the early 60s, and that was very exciting. But then when I got into teaching, when Minor White came to MIT in '67 and I started studying with him, I sold all my negatives that I made for the Architects Collaborative. I sold them the negatives. I didn't want to even do reprints. I was out of the commercial world. I was going to teach, and that was it. And that's been it.
So, Ron, tell us about now going from seeing this piece of cabbage. Tell us about that and that whole idea of what you call fine arts photography. Tell us about your path from seeing that, being inspired, and then moving into this so-called fine arts photography. And tell us about what that is, what that means to you.
It's a process of self-discovery. I remember as a very young child, wondering, what were the odds of my existence on this planet? I questioned things at a very, very early age. And there was something, about nature that I discovered. What I can appreciate in nature is what I can appreciate in myself. To use a religious term, it's a communion, where you really feel connected. I could wander through a forest or on the ocean or whatever, and my level of appreciation has grown so, and because of that, it's like I'm never alone. It's like I feel part of what's out there, and it's kind of it's like a self-discovery process. And I don't know. It just started at a very, very young age, and it's only grown. And this is what I try to teach others. About really being more present to the moment. When photographing, and I have different exercises that I teach people, and some people really understand. And for some, they're just not ready yet.
You mentioned right now going into nature and having this feeling of completeness, of communion, that you're not alone, that you feel good, so to say. How did that then, when was this decision made that you would be taking people there with you? You would be taking them on those trips into nature. Clearly, most of your work today is based on these somewhat, or should I say very, very, they seem transcendental photos of something where, it would not be an exaggeration to say they're aiming for Moses meeting the Lord on Mount Sinai. I mean, you give this transcendental feeling of man, God, nature all together. Tell us about that. Tell us when you decided, okay, that was what you were going for.
I got to backtrack just a little bit. In 1969, I started teaching photography, my first real teaching job, the Worcester Center for Crafts. And about that time, I met Paul Campanegro, who had just returned from, he had a National Endowment of the Arts grant, and he had been photographing in England and Ireland. And his work inspired me. I mean, I looked at his work from Ireland, and I could feel my blood tingle. There was just something about his work, and I felt I just had to go to Ireland and see for myself. And it was the winter of 1971 that for all of $500, that covered airfare, a rental car, accommodations, and I could bring home an Aaron's knit sweater as well. You know, I remember the airfare was $165. I still remember that. So I fell in love with Ireland at a very early age. I remember coming back on the airplane feeling almost depressed. And then I heard this little voice inside of me and said, hey, silly, you know, just come back again. Don't worry about it. And I said, yeah, I could come back. And then I started going back like once or twice a year. And then some of my students at the Craft Center, after a number of years, said, you know, next time you go to Ireland, we'd love to go with you. And that was 1976. I led my first international photo tour. Nobody was leading photo tours back then. You know, it's blossomed into this huge industry now. I don't know if anyone really started before me. It's possible. I can't claim to be the first because I don't know everybody. But there was no advertising back then of photo tours or whatever. So I took a group of students over to the west of Ireland, and I discovered something that I didn't know about. I loved sharing, you know, what I had learned of, you know, like photographing there 7 or 8 times on my own. I made some great discoveries, and to share that with people was a new dimension. It really was beyond just making nice photographs and enjoying being in nature. You know, to be able to help others and to share others. One of those students, in fact, who came with me back in '76, never came home. And she's still there. I visited her last May. She's had a whole life. She got married. She has 3 kids. She had trouble getting photographic supplies, and she had a weaving workshop, and she took up weaving. She was from Worcester, Mass, and she has a studio out on Clare Island in Clúibé, and you know, has become a very well-known weaver in the west of Ireland. And she was on the first trip with me, and she actually went on the first trip and the second trip. And I think it was the second trip she decided that she just there was something about Ireland that spoke to her, and she just had to stay there.
So Ron, before we go on to again these tours that you started doing, tell us more about that. When you first felt that you were successful at photography, what did that mean? What kind of photos were they?
Wow. You know, if I could get up, I could show you something just for a second, because I see it right over here. Don't go away. This, and I have this out for a specific reason. This is an aperture monograph called Light 7, Light to the 7th Power. And in 1967, I started a workshop with Minor White. It could have been 68. And I made an image, which I'm going to show you here. It's on the left side, and it shared a mat with a print from Jerry Ullsman. This print kind of pointed the way to my future. It changed my life in a way. The exhibition traveled all over the United States, you know, to different galleries. MIT bought all the prints, and coincidentally, while I was in Morocco last week, I get an email from a friend of mine who was visiting the MIT Museum, where there is sort of an exhibition now of the Minor White years, and he took a photograph of my photograph hanging on the wall, you know, of that exhibition, you know, representing the Light 7 show. But this image it really is, it's like pointing to the future.
And what is it about that image? What is it?
Well, you talked about, well, I mean, this is more literal. The man on the mountain. It's a very abstract image of basically it's sand and ice and pebbles, and that was it. It was on the beach at Rockport. It was about, it must have been about 10 below zero. I mean, I was freezing, and this was with a 4x5 view camera, and I just saw this pattern, and it spoke to me, and it just really changed my life, because Miner loved the image, and made it part of the show, an integral part of this Light 7 show, and it was like an affirmation. It was like a big time affirmation, and I went to the show, and wow, it's like people liked it, I mean, that's another kind of affirmation when you exhibit your work. And I always encourage people to exhibit as much as possible, because we all need this kind of affirmation, really, about what we're doing. It's like a pat on the back, good job.
Ron, so this was then that photo from Rockport that you took when it was sub-zero temperature or whatever, it was very cold, and you felt, okay, I mean, you had a personal experience taking that photo, then through the photo, other people were telling you, yes, that was, really something. Was it from that point on that you said, okay, it's going to be nature all the way, it's going to be these larger-than-life photos, this romantic, these photos full of emotion, full of humanity?
I have to tell you, Simeon, that I haven't, it was never a conscious decision. It was like I was being taken on a journey, and I just went with it. I mean, people often ask me about my life, being able to do what I love doing, right from the get-go. And I often, I kind of tell them this silly story. I say, well, I only put one foot in front of the other because if I stop, I'm going to fall flat on my face. I just keep on going along. Like, I got a phone call earlier today from a mutual friend of ours from Concord, who you know, who said that she saw my show at the Pittsburgh Art Museum and took a photograph of the Torii Gate from in Japan, and she sent it to a friend of hers in Japan who inquired about using it in an exhibition in Japan. I mean, just like one thing leads to another. I just never know. It's like, I'm open to the universe. Whatever happens, happens. And I mean, like, you're here. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of us meeting? I mean, it's just, with all the millions of people in the world, and here we are. Like, one thing, it's almost like a fated thing, and I'm along for the ride and enjoying it.
So tell us about the format problems you ran into when you said, before moving on to digital cameras, which does not have that much to do with formatting, but that you ran into these format problems. You were making these very large prints, these very large negatives, and that you actually ended up starting a correspondence with Ansel Adams in order to figure out how to print these large photos that really nobody else was doing at that time.
Well, in the beginning, sounds like a biblical story, in the beginning. I mean, the first time I did a test with 8x10 negatives, I put them all into the first solution at once, not realizing that they're just going to stick like glue to each other, and you have to put them in separately. I mean, I was going one step at a time, and I learned by making mistakes, and then there were some bigger technical questions, and that's why I started writing to Ansel Adams, and he was just extremely generous, in his responses. And so I learned how to do 8x10 negatives. My wife Kathy and I, we had a small apartment in Princeton, Mass, just north of here. And at the end of the hallway, I kind of put up a door and some black plastic tape and everything like that, and made a little darkroom in there. It was so small, the trays had to be stacked on top of each other with a tray stacking device. So the developer short stop and fix like that. And it was the tiniest. It was about the size of this door. That was the size of the darkroom. And I was making just contact prints, which is what Edward Weston did his whole life. And for many years, I was only doing 8x10 contact prints with just one light bulb and, making, 8x10 prints. And then out of the blue, someone said, "Would you like an 8x10 enlarger?" They were getting rid of it. It was in the school of the Worcester Art Museum, in fact, and they had no use for it anymore. They wanted to get rid of it, so I took it and I used that for many years. And that again opened up all kinds of doors, because then I was able actually to crop. With an 8x10, you have to learn to see, what's on the back of the camera. There wasn't any leeway. I mean, that was it. Which was a tremendous discipline, for me to get started that way. And I still carry that discipline with me. I rarely crop. And I still have the same kind of, what I tell people, large format mentality, even though I'm shooting 35 millimeter. I shoot with what's called live view. So I'm looking at the back of the LED screen, with both eyes, composing the image that way. Occasionally, I know I'm going to crop the image ahead of time. As Minor White used to refer to, pre-visualization. Kind of in your mind, kind of visualize the final print, which you can't do 100%, but you have to be consciously doing that. Otherwise, the camera kind of takes over, and you get something. You say, "Well, that's the way it was." But for me, it's not the way it was. It's how I will interpret the light that is reflecting off of subject matter. For me, the image is not the subject matter. It's all about the light that reflects off the subject matter. And so I learned large format, and for almost 50 years, I was doing just large format. And, I've exhibited all over the world, in many different countries and in the States. And then digital came along. This was a hurdle. I think it was a hurdle for everybody, every film photographer. And today there are some film photographers who say, "Well, I tried it but didn't like it," or "the quality isn't as good." When push comes to shove, a lot of people are afraid of it, because it's a whole new technology. I tell people, can you imagine that you're a dentist and you go to work one day and all the tools are different and the language has changed. That's really what happened with digital photography. But you wind up at the same place. Once you learn the language, once you learn the technique, you're really back at the same place with far more control. And the quality now is so good. It's very hard to tell the difference. I can only tell the difference if I feel the paper. I know what silver paper feels like in my hands. But if there's two prints on the wall side by side, you can't tell the difference.
So Ron, tell us now about these tours that you do. It's called Strabo Tours. It's your own company. Tell us about this taking other people with you, because as you say about your own work, it's showing people the world through your eyes.
Yes.
And in this way, these tours, you're actually bringing these people to the places where you do photography.
Yes.
And so tell us about that. That seems like an extraordinary thing that's very personal, because you really like showing things to people, you really like being around people, you really like discovering new things and teaching people photography also. Tell us about development in your career.
Well, I mentioned earlier how some of my students earlier on, like the first tour I did in '76, how they said, "We love your work from Ireland, we'd like to go with you." And so one thing led to another, and they told their friends, and the next year I was doing, I think, 2 or 3 tours to Ireland. And before you knew it, I was doing like 4 or 5 tours a year to Ireland, like 2-week trips. And then I started advertising in a magazine back then called American Photographer. And now, like, Outdoor Photographer took over this American Photographer. But I started advertising for a number of years. And then I get this letter in the mail from what is now Strabo Tours. And they said, "We've seen your ad for many years. Would you be interested in taking a group to Kenya?" Yikes, Kenya. To me, that was a foreign country. Ireland was not a foreign country anymore. That was like a home away from home, very comfortable. And I was thinking, wow, Kenya, that should be very exciting. So I did a trip, probably in the mid-'80s, to Kenya. And then they said, you want to do another one next year? And I said, sure. And they said, how about you do Kenya and then also add on Peru, Machu Picchu. I did that. And then they said, well, how about next year, Galapagos and Kenya and Machu Picchu? I did that. And then it dawned on me, like, these guys are so much more organized. Now, before, it was my wife and I. And it was a lot of work. There's advertising, there's marketing, there's printing brochures, there's answering the phone. I'd be away, and poor Kathy's on the phone answering all these questions. It was a lot of work. But then when Strabo came along, I said, wow, they are so organized. They take care of everything. So I talked to the CEO, and I said, how about you take over the Irish business that I have, and you do all the marketing, all the advertising, everything else. I meet people at the airport, do my thing, and that's what I enjoy doing the most, and you figure out how much, I could get paid for doing it, and we reached an agreement, and everything worked out fine. So I started, expanding. Like this May, for instance, I started off in Santorini early in May, and then I actually did 3 back-to-backs, which was a lot. From Santorini, I went to the Faroe Islands, and then from the Faroe Islands, I went to Ireland. And then I came home for a little bit, and then, there's sort of one thing after another. That's, I mentioned I just came home from Morocco, and soon I'll be back in Ireland, and then New Zealand, and then Morocco again, and, it keeps on going. So this Strabo Tours, it's just been a lifesaver for me, and just how it came along at the right time. Everything just kind of comes along at the right time, and it's allowed me to photograph in places I never would have imagined, and so I could, it's a combination of teaching. I do like programs, like for instance in Morocco, I leave a slide projector. And in Ireland, I leave a slide, a digital projector, so I could do different programs in the evening there. It's like the world has been my workplace. So I'm very, very fortunate. And, all the tours are listed on, the website, and I'm sure you'll let people know, www.phototc.com. I'm one of about 20 people that work for Strabo Tours, by the way. I'm not the only one. And they do tours all over the world, from Patagonia to, Eastern Europe and all over. I have about 7 or 8 countries that I specialize in. I don't really enjoy doing a brand new country, because then I don't know the options, on a day-to-day basis. But most of the countries I work in, I've been there several times or more. A lot of them for like 20, 30 years. Ireland the most, of course. I'm an honorary citizen, in fact, in the town of Westport in County Mayo. So that's sort of a home away from home. And but all the other countries I know exceptionally well. I'm the local guide in Ireland, and I'm also the local guide in Venice, that I happen to know exceptionally well. Otherwise, we work with local guides, who know the best restaurants and also really good locations and all that. Strabo Tours takes care of all the accommodations and transportation over there, and they're just absolutely wonderful to work with. Wonderful.
Ron, now let's turn to the political part of this interview. Tell us about, at this time, is inescapable, the time that we're living in the United States. There are, we talk so much about the privileged class, people who, especially in academia and the fine arts, we talk about, that some people are privileged so they can do certain things. When you think about art today, and when you started, of course, at this gigantic economic boom right after World War II and all that, and this new, very extraordinarily powerful country. What do you think about when you think about for the photographers of tomorrow, for the artists of tomorrow? What do you think of when you know that you per se were extremely fortunate at the time that you started, that photography was a new thing, that you had all of these opportunities that maybe today some people wouldn't? What do you think about all that?
I think that, in a way, lots of stuff has changed. The world is a new world since I got started. However, for many years. I mean, my wife and I had a one-room apartment, and we would sleep on blankets on the floor. I remember I went shopping at the local dump and made a lamp out of a broken bucket. And we had exceptionally little, but we were happy. And I was just totally dedicated to what I was doing. And I've had a number of not a lot, but some younger people over the years who have also made a great effort to travel with me and to learn. And some of them have done exceptionally well because they stick to their guns. I mean, if you know what you want and you really stick to it, somehow, like, the universe takes care of you. That's my philosophy. I tell people I've always relied on miracles. And, just when things seem at their worst, like something happens. I've had a few, like, windfalls, like, out of the blue, and like when my credit cards are going through the roof and whatever. Once had a buyer from Paris came, and someone recommended he look at my work. I mean, he probably bought like $20,000 worth of prints. This was some years ago. But every now and then, like, something out of the blue just kind of happens. And it's only because I think you have to really believe in yourself. And know it may take many years. I mean, so many people have the same story. On TV, that show of Finding Your Roots, where you have these famous movie stars and they talk about how they were going to act regardless. And for years and years and years, they didn't get their break, and all of a sudden something happened. They stayed with it. And I guess that's what it takes. You got to be stubborn. You got to stay with what you really love doing, and doors open. That's all I could say. Doors open.